We're going to have a look at converting between fractions, decimals and percentages. I'm going to start by using some decimals, and we're going to first of all convert them to percentages. So what helps with all of our decimal, percentage and fractions is remembering our place values. So before I do anything, I'm just going to write down that we've got our units here, we've got our tenths and our hundredths column. Now in front of our units is tens, we don't really worry about that, and after our hundredths is our thousands. Now the reason we're using this is because we need to remember that percent means per hundred. And we're going to keep coming back to that idea. So if I look at 0.3 and I want to turn that into a percent, it means I need to know what it is per 100. Now at the moment, I've got 3 tenths. So I've got 3 tenths. So how many hundredths do I have? Well, actually underneath my hundredths column, I would have nothing. But altogether, I have 30 hundredths. Now, percent means per 100. So I've got 30 per 100, which is the same as 30%. So 0.3 is 30%. We're going to move down now to 0.13. Again, I want to know how many I've got per 100. So we look at my hundredths column, and I look down below. I've got 13 per 100, which means I've got 13%. And we'll go down to the bottom one, 0.03. Well, altogether, I've got 3 hundredths. So 3 per 100, which is 3%. You can make that a little bit trickier by making the number a bit longer. So if I choose another example, 0.152, for example, and this is kind of the trickiest you're going to get in this situation. We've got 0.152. I want it per cent, which means I want it per 100. So I look at my hundredths column. Well, how many hundredths have I got? Well, if I ignore that 2 for a moment, I've got 15 hundredths. So I've got 15 per 100, so 15%. But I can't completely ignore the 2. So what I've got is, I know I've got 15%, but I've got the extra bit too. I've got that little 0.2. So it's 15.2%. And that's as hard as that will get. And hopefully that has made that a little bit easier. So remember, if you've got decimals, we're trying to read the per hundreds. We need the hundredths column, and that means it's percent then. Now I'm just going to go back, and I'm going to undo a few things I've done so that we can now look at turning them to fractions. It's exactly the same concept for fractions, but this time we just need to think about slightly more. So we've just done decimals to percentages, now we're going to do decimals to fractions. So 0.3. Now, as I said, if we look at our place value, it will help. So just here, I've got 3 tenths. So actually, I've already got my fraction, 3 tenths. So I'm going to write 3 tenths. And it's as simple as that. Now, we would also want to think about, can I simplify it? Well, 3 and 10 are not in the same times table, so no, we can't. And that's fine. Now, if I move down, I've got, as we said before, 13, and it ends under the hundredths column. So I've got 13 hundredths, and that's it. Can I simplify it? Well, 13 and 100 are only in the 1 times table, so there's nothing I can do to the top and the bottom other than divide by 1, which is pointless, so we can leave that the same. Let's look at that final one. I've got my number ending under the hundredths column, and I've got 3 hundredths. And therefore, I've got 3 per 100, and that's it. It's a fraction. So I'm finished. As I said, the only time it would get a bit trickier is if we say I have 0.8. Then what we would do is think about the fact that the 8 is first of all under the tenths column. So I've got 8 tenths. Now, that is still a correct answer, but it's not simplified. So I have to think, what times table are both 8 and 10 in? They're in the 2's, which means if I divide them both by 2, I will have a simplified fraction. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, 10 divided by 2 is 5, it's 4/5. So that's completed that question. So just be aware that sometimes once you've turned your decimal into a fraction, you might have to simplify it. Okay, well, let's move on. Now we're going to look at percentages and turning those into decimals and fractions. So first of all, I'm going to go back to my place value. So I've got my tens, my units, my tenths, my hundredths, and sometimes my thousandths if I need them. Now remember I said percent means per hundred. So I've got 41%, so 41 per hundred, which means whatever I do, it's going to end under the hundredths column. So 41% means it's going to end up being 41 per hundred. So I've got 41 hundredths, but don't forget I've got my decimal place here. So that means 41% is the same as 0.41. Well, let's try 4%. 4% means it's per hundred. 4% means 4 hundredths. So it's going to end under the hundredths column, which means I've got 4 per hundred. Now, this isn't quite right yet because there's some bits I need to fill in, because I can't just leave that 4 there, because to represent 4 hundredths I need to say I've got no tenths and I've got my decimal and no units. So 4% is 0.04. Now let's go down to 14%. Again, percent means per hundred, so 14 is 14 per hundred. I've got 4 under the hundredths, 1 under the tenths, and then my decimal, so 14% is 0.14. And that's it. It's done. It's probably one of the nicest ones to do. Percent to decimal, we just write it under the hundredths column. There is another way of getting there if you would like to know about it, and it's quite a useful thing to know. To go from percent to decimal, you may have noticed that 41, to get to 0.41, moves 2 place values across. So 41 would be under the tens and units, and it's moved 2 place values across to be under the tenths and the hundredths. So we can divide by 100 and move down 41 2 place values to get the decimal. So that is another way of thinking about it. Whatever number you have, you move it down 2 place values, you get your decimal equivalent. Okay, let's clear that screen again so that we can now look at the fractions. Okay, so for fractions, again, we're going to use our hundreds, tens, and all of those, the place value columns, to help us. So, as we said, 41% is 41 per hundred, which means I've got 41 ending under my hundredths column, which is 41 per hundred. And that's it. Does 41 earn 100? Are they in the same times table? No, they're not. So we can leave it as it is. 4% means 4 per 100. So we can skip writing down that, because actually 4% is 4 per 100. Can I simplify this? Well, actually both of those are in the 2 times table. So divide the top by 2, I get 2. Divide the bottom by 2, I get 50. And actually what we realise is that 2 and 50 are both even again, so I can divide them both by 2 again. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, 50 divided by 2 is 25. So actually 4% is the same as 1/25. Let's have a look at 14%. Well, 14% is again 14 per 100. So we could be writing this under our hundreds, tens and units again and look at the place value, but percent means per 100, so we can put it straight into a fraction. So 14%. Now, can I do anything to those? 14 and 100 in the 2 times table because they're even. So let's halve them again. Let's divide both by 2. 7, and then 100 divided by 2 is 50. Now, 50 and 7 are not in the same times table, so there's nothing else we can do at that point. So 14% is the same as 7/50. And we finished that bit. I'm just going to rub out some stuff so we can move across over here. Now, we've done our decimals and we've done our percentages. We're now going to look at our fractions. So if we want to turn our fractions into percent, we need them to be per 100. I keep saying about this per 100. So I would like this fraction to be per 100 to be percent. So 2/5. Well, how do I get from 5 to 100? Well, I times by 20. So whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 2 times 20 is 40. So 2/5 is the same as 40 per 100, which must be 40 per cent. And just a little note here. Percent, the percent sign is made up of what looks like a 1 and 2 zeros. So don't forget, percent means per 100. Okay, just to keep that in mind. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. So percent means per 100. Can I get from 10 to 100? Yes, I can. I times by 10. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So we'll times that by 10 too. 70 per 100 is 70%. And finally, the bottom one. We want it to be per 100. How do you get from 25 to 100? We times by 4. So I must do the same to the top. Times by 4. 8 times 4 is 32. 32 per 100 is 32%. Now, at this point, I would use what we've just done to then turn them into decimals. So it's much easier to go from a fraction to a percentage than to a decimal, unless you're using a calculator. So there are two methods. So the first method is remembering and going back to the fact that 40%, well, we can turn that into a decimal because I can either divide it by 100 and move it down 2 place values, or 40% is 40 per 100. So under my columns, it's going to be 0.40, which is still the same as 0.4. 70%, again, divide by 100, so it goes down 2 place values, or 70 hundredths is 0.7 or 0.70. Either are fine. 32% would end under the 32 per hundreds, so we end up with 0.32. So getting from fractions to decimals is much quicker if you go via your percentages first. The other thing we can do, and I'm going to use 2/5 as an example, is actually do the division. Okay, so 2/5 is 2 divided by 5. So to do that, I'm going to use the bus stop method. So 2 divided by 5. Now, it's not going to be a whole number. We know that already because we've just looked it up above. So I'm going to put a decimal in here. I'm going to put in some extra place value holders. 2.00 is still the same as 2. So we want to keep that in our mind. So 5 times something gets 2. Well, it's not a very nice number. So 2 doesn't really divide by 5 nicely. So I'm going to say there's none there, and I'm going to carry my 2 across to kind of see what happens next. 5 times something gets 20. It does. It's 4, which means I can then stop. And 2/5 is 0.4. I hope you found some of those tips helpful. Thank you.